I'm your host, Marc Bernstein, and my guest today is Joey Coleman, author of Never Lose a Customer Again and Chief Experience Composer at Design Symphony. Joey, how are you doing?
Oh, I am thrilled to be here, Marc. Thanks so much for having me on the show today.
You are so welcome. So, if I could start off with maybe a little tangent, you sang a solo at the Kennedy Center.
I did, yes. I've had the pleasure of singing for many, many years with a lot of different groups. And when I was in Washington D.C., I sang with the Washington Men's Camerata. And long story short, a good friend of mine who's also a first tenor, as we were leading up to the performance, he said, "I think you should do this solo." And I was like, "Really? I would love to do this solo." So I did the solo, and it was a lot of fun and certainly a memorable experience.
Wow. And how long did you spend preparing for that solo?
Oh, well, the song that I sang the solo in, I had done that song as part of choral performances probably over 1,000 times. Now, I hadn't done the solo, but I had done all the rest of the song and then done the solo on the side. So yeah, I sang 4 years in the Notre Dame Glee Club in college, where we traveled internationally and did, hundreds and hundreds of concerts, singing thousands and thousands of songs. So spent a lot of time singing over the years.
Incredible. I have a feeling that the power of the human voice is something we'll be talking about a little bit later today.
Absolutely.
Growing up, I'm actually from the Washington, D.C. area myself. And growing up, I was in the National Cathedral Boys Choir.
Oh,
Um,
very nice. That's where we used to rehearse. They're right outside of National Cathedral. There's the girls' school that's right there on the grounds. That
yep,
was our rehearsal space. So
yep.
when I was with the Camerata in DC, that's where we always rehearsed. I love it. What a small world.
Beautiful grounds, beautiful grounds. And for those folks who don't know, the Kennedy Center is the top of the top. Like that's where when the president is trying to go to musical performance, that's where he goes or she goes.
Or she, you're right. It is a
Yep.
beautiful, beautiful venue. It's a real honor. I've had the pleasure of performing there several times, and it's just a lot of fun. It's a lot of fun.
So, Joey, offline, we were talking about this concept that I think would be a really cool theme for today's episode. And that is the untold story or the neglected story of the revenue side of customer experience. And you've dug into this a whole bunch, with your book. So maybe do you want to tell everyone a little bit about the book you wrote and your perspective on it?
Sure, Marc. So, my book is called Never Lose a Customer Again. And the entire principle behind the book is that businesses spend so much time, money, and effort trying to acquire new customers and very little time, money, or effort trying to retain those customers that they worked so hard to get. And as much as customer experience is a lot about how your customers feel and their emotional connection to your brand, I believe that if there isn't a business case for taking care of your customers, you're going to be hard pressed to get everybody in your organization on board. In my experience, every organization has some people who lean more towards the touchy-feely emotional side of life. And there's some people in your business that lean more towards the analytical, data-driven analysis side of life. And both of those are great. And some people spend time in both of them. But my belief is that if we spend our efforts focused on making the business case or the financial case for customer experience, we can get buy-in a lot easier. Not to mention, it gives us a really practical way of measuring the success of our efforts. And when we can say, hey, paying attention to this customer led to this increase in revenues, which led to this increase in profits, which allowed us to take XYZ steps, it dramatically changes the conversation as opposed to, well, they seem to like us. Well, they seem to be fans. Those are important things, but they're a little more amorphous in their impact on the brand or the organization.
Joey, I think you are so right. And I think maybe that's one of the big reasons that the customer experience space has historically been focused on cost reduction is because they had a lot of practice making the business case. Less time on the call, customer is out the door faster, saves you money. And that business case has been refined and practiced and practiced. But when you hear about the other side, driving customer experience, improves customer outcomes, and then we haven't really completed that story very well. So I do think that if the industry can come together and start to say, this is the business case, the quantitative business case for a good customer experience, that could shift the focus away from just trying to give customers interactions as fast as possible, more toward how do you retain your customers and give them wonderful experiences.
Well, absolutely. And I think, Mark, one of the interesting things in the world of the contact center is we've seen the evolution of the philosophy behind a contact center. My perception, and for all of you listening, I'm the outsider, right? I've never formally worked in a contact center, although I've listened in on many a call from many contact centers around the country. One of the things that I think initially started happening is, okay, we're going to create this contact center as a way to field customer service requests and people calling in with questions and things that they need. But because this is kind of serving our customers, we need to keep these calls quick because otherwise we need to staff up a lot of non-revenue generating people. And so that was the model. Well, then we kind of started to realize, well, if we've got all these people on the phone with our customers already, we should try to get them to sell some stuff. And so then we started getting outbound contact centers, which were, hey, if we're not dealing with an inbound call, let's run a router back the other way and you can be doing some sales on an outbound effort. And now we could start to monetize the interactions. The problem is in a lot of contact centers, they didn't get rid of that requirement of keeping the call as short as possible. And so what happened is they got excited about the increased profitability, but they were still over-indexing on an incentive that was really not in alignment with the lifetime value of the relationship. It was maybe in alignment with the profitability for the day or that shift at the contact center, but it was not aligned with the overall goal of creating a deeper long-term relationship with the customers. And so I think where we see things evolving now is less of an emphasis on time spent on the call and more of an emphasis on resolution and how many calls does it take to get resolution and what is the potential of an upsell in a resolution call to get them to extend a warranty, to spend more time with us, etc. So I think we're getting more sophisticated and more strategic in our operations. That being said, there are still thousands, if not tens of thousands of contact centers around the world that are operating in that old paradigm. Well, how long were you on the call? Oh, we got to get faster. Oh, what'd you do? Come on, we move. If they call back later, who cares? We're all about cranking through the queue and making sure we're all set. So I think there's plenty of room for growth.
Joey, one of the things that you mentioned is this concept of harmony across all the different customer interactions. If you're trying to have a strategy to improve retention, and then you have a strategy to improve customer experience, and then you have a strategy to drive revenue on your calls, what is the common thread? Because I imagine there's something underlying all of those initiatives that you could drive that would raise all ships, so to speak.
Yeah, well, for me at least, I think the common thread is employees who are trained enough and empowered enough to recognize what part of the song they're playing right now. Now, here's the crazy thing. If I've had a horrible experience with a product and something's not working or there's missing parts and I get something and I'm going to call into the contact center to, for lack of a better way of putting it, register a complaint or seek some type of resolution, the person answering the phone or the person on the other end of the chat or the person who's representing the brand or the company to me should be cognizant of my emotional state and realize when I'm in a frustrated, irritated state, this is not the time to try to sell me on another additional product. That being said, all too often, I think we get into this pattern of, well, if we're only focused on resolutions, we're missing the opportunity for deepenings. We're missing the opportunity for extending the conversation into better places that our customers lots of times are more than willing to go if they feel that they've been invited into that conversation instead of forced into that conversation. So when we think about harmony, for me, when we started our conversation talking about music, I sang a lot in male choirs, right? So we have four voice parts and they're all men. There's a tenor one singing the very top high notes, tenor two singing probably the part of the song you're familiar with, a baritone that's providing some undertones, and then the bass that's the deep foundation underneath all of it. If any one of those voice parts, if you will, starts to overpower the other three, the sound isn't nearly as enjoyable. And so I think in any contact center, when the goal of resolution or the goal of upselling or the goal of, getting off the call as quickly as possible, whatever the goals we're incentivizing, if we over index on any of those, if we do any of those too much, the harmony starts to fall out.
That's so tough. It's tough because um, the human brain can only focus on one thing or maybe a couple things at a time. So you can think of tactically and practically. The contact center leaders say, "Hey, folks, this month is upsell month. Everyone focus on upsells. That's what we're going to be yelling from the rooftops. Is let's get all the upsells we can." And you could see how that can drive behaviors and drive attention. But I get your point. I get your point that if you do that, you're going to have some sort of slippage in the other things that really matter. So, what does achieving that balance look like?
Well, to be blunt, and this is not meant as a criticism to anybody that would say this month's all about the upsell, you should never say that. Like that's not the kind of messaging I think that we want to give to our employees. Or I'm hard pressed, maybe never's too strong of a word. I'm hard pressed to see an environment where we should have a blanket assumption like that that's going to run for 30 days for every single phone call.
Mm-hmm.
Instead, I think we need to empower and train our employees to recognize that every caller is coming to the phone or coming to the conversation with their present emotional state. One of the first things we want to do is identify what is their current emotional state. Are they happy? Are they sad? Are they frustrated? Are they intrigued? Are they calling with questions? Are they calling with complaints? We need to kind of identify what's going on there. And then once we identify that, take the conversation in a way that builds on that emotion. We can try to navigate them out of that emotion, but we don't want to give them whiplash pulling them out of it. So if I've called to complain, don't jump me into an upsell conversation right away. Let me complain. Let me get through those things and then maybe open a door or create an invitation to lead into the next conversation. See, I think this idea of treating all of our customers the same is where we run into problems. I am one of the
Yeah.
few customer experience folks I think you'll find who strongly advocates for every customer should be treated differently. Now, every customer should be treated well. Don't get me wrong. That is not an excuse to treat some of them poorly and some of them very well. But I think we need to meet our customers where they're at, and it changes the conversation when we do that.
That is a hot topic, Joey. When you hear what contact center leaders are talking about, they'll often say, obviously quality and consistency. But I think you're saying that you can over index on consistency where it could detract from quality.
Oh, absolutely. And I mean, we only need to see. Let's take it out of the contact center to see how that might manifest itself in life. We're recording this in the late spring, right? And so lots of things. I'm looking out my window. I see lots of things growing. We had a big rainstorm here last night, and everything is sprouting up and turning green and feeling good. Now, imagine, Mark, if we brought as much rain as we brought last night today and tomorrow and the next day, consistently, day after day after day after day. We'd get to the end of the quarter and I'd look out here and it would be a muddy swamp mess. It would actually be killing the vegetation because of too much water. So even a really good thing can cause all sorts of problem. I think when we think of consistency, what we should be thinking of consistency of experience as opposed to consistency of tactic, right? So we want to create a feeling that is consistently good and consistently remarkable, but we don't necessarily want to be using the same tools, because the same tool used again and again goes from being consistent to being rote to being annoying.
Hmm. What are the skills you should train agents then on in order to be able to deliver that kind of experience?
Oh, the number one skill that I think agents should be trained on, and it's fascinating because we don't really talk about it in our schools. Increasingly, we don't talk about it in our homes, and there's been very few books written on it or trainings given on it, which is the skill of empathy. See, lots of times we mistake the word empathy for the word sympathy, right? And we think, oh, well, I sympathize with where you're at. No, no, no. I would rather have you empathize with where I'm at, because in empathy, you're stepping into my shoes and trying to have the experience. I think the best contact center agents are the ones who very quickly can discern, does this person have a lot of time for this call today or very little time? Does this person want to talk or do they just want to vent? Does this person want to seek some type of a resolution, or is this person coming from a place of inquiry? And the quicker we can identify what state they're in and then manage the conversation accordingly, the deeper those relationships will be. I mean, we've all probably at some point in our lives had an experience where we found ourselves in a conversation where we thought, is this person even listening to me? Yes, they're talking. Yes, they're volleying back and forth, but I feel like they're on a script, or I feel like they have a secondary agenda, or I feel like they're just going through the motions. As humans, we've got great antenna for that. And so I think when we step back and we look at what do we want to train our call center or contact center agents to do, it's to be better about listening and better about empathizing, because those two skills will outperform a script or a goal every day.
Joey, I think you're so right. It's funny. I was just picturing it, and I think there's a distinct feeling that you get when you feel like you're not being listened to, or you feel like you're not understood. And it's like this feeling where something is like coming up out of you, and you want to say like, it's not it. That's not it. That's not it. Um, and it's maybe also I'm trying to like again picture it like this feeling of a lack of control of the situation, like something is happening outside of your control, that the world is not moving the direction you want it to. And I can imagine that customers being in that state doesn't make them more likely to retain, doesn't make them more likely to tell their friends, and doesn't make them more likely to do an upsell or whatever that may be.
Absolutely, Mark. And here's the interesting thing. Let's stop and imagine all the possible reasons why a customer would reach out to a contact center. How many of those fall into the category of something they were planning to do? Very few. Usually, if you're reaching out to the contact center, it's because something went wrong or something wasn't quite right, or you want to take something to the second level, but you have these mixed emotions about it. So it's like, I'm calling to sign up for a service. It's like, yeah, I want the service and I want to give you what I need to give you, but I don't want to have to tell you 10 times, and I don't want to be upsold into 38 things I don't need, and I don't want to stay on this call 1 second longer than I have to. And so when we think about, what are the intention of the customer is, lots of times I think that gives us a roadmap for how we should navigate the conversation.
Mm-hmm. Let's go back to empathy for a second. One of the natural questions that I think springs out of these conversations is we say, okay, the best agents have empathy. And then we say, well, how do you train it? How do you coach it? What do you think?
Yeah, well, I think the interesting thing is when we talk about customer experience, I often find that we can't have a substantive conversation about customer experience without talking about employee experience, because in my opinion, they're two sides of the same coin. As you enhance the employee experience, you naturally enhance the customer experience. As the customer experience goes up, the employee experience will go up because the customers are easier to deal with. So these things, to your point earlier about all boats rising together or sinking together, customer experience and employee experience are right paired up next to each other, operating that way. I think one of the challenges that I see in a lot of organizations is that they want the employees to do a better job of treating the customers well, but they haven't spent a lot of time thinking about how they treat the employees. So we're going to put together a whole training package on how to teach our agents empathy, but we can't point to many instances where we have shown our agents empathy in their interactions with their managers or their team leaders. And so I think there's a real opportunity here that if you want your employees to deliver a certain type of experience, you have to make sure that they've actually had that experience. I'll regularly say in a customer context, quick story, if I may. So years ago, I was giving a presentation and the CEO before the event said, Joey, I want you to teach our people how to deliver first-class Ritz-Carlton experience, 5-star experience, first class Ritz-Carlton white glove experience. That's what I said. First class Ritz-Carlton white glove experience. I said, okay. He's like, no, really, first class Ritz-Carlton. I was like, I got it. And he's like, no, really, I really want that to be the emphasis. I was like, I 100% got it. So I walk into the day event. There's about 200 people in the event. I said, ladies and gentlemen, so excited to be here and spend the day doing a workshop together. We're going to be talking about creating a first class Ritz-Carlton white glove experience. And I see the CEO's eyes light up. He's super excited. We're going to have this conversation. Now I said, all right, but before we do that, I want to ask a quick question. By a show of hands, how many of you have ever flown first class? The CEO proudly raised his hand. The head of sales raised her hand. The CFO raised her hand. And no one else in the room raised their hand. I said, great. Second question. How many of you have ever spent the night at the Ritz-Carlton? CEO proudly raises his hand. Head of sales raises her hand. CFO puts her hand down. She's like, do you know what they charge for a room at that night? This is ridiculous. I was like, okay. They're the only ones that raise their hand. Last question. How many of you have ever had a meal where the wait staff delivered your meal wearing white gloves? No one put their hand up. I said, it is impossible to ask our team to deliver a first-class Ritz-Carlton white glove experience if they have no context for what that means. Sweeping stereotype approaching, forgive me, listeners, but the majority of contact center agents have not flown first class. They've not spent the night at the Ritz-Carlton. They've not had a meal where it's been delivered by wait staff wearing white gloves. I'm not saying that that's wrong or that's bad or that there's any value judgment on that. What I am saying is if you want your employees, if you want your agents, if you want your team members to deliver that caliber of experience, you have to give them an understanding and a context for what that caliber of experience really entails.
That is awesome. There is this saying in the Japanese methodology of management, or the Toyota methodology of management, called go to the djembe. And the djembe is the place, roughly translated to the place where it happens. And I think if we're going to ask folks to empathize with customers and try to understand, how the customers feel, they should go to the place where it happens. They should be a customer. I actually wrote a sales piece a few years ago, like on a blog, and the title of the blog post was "Go Buy Something." And it was if you're new in sales and you're trying to figure out how to be a good salesperson, go be a buyer. Go to Nordstrom and buy yourself a tie. Go to the Apple store and buy yourself a little widget or whatever you want, but go buy something and observe and feel what it's like to be the buyer. Not don't observe the seller and say, are they doing a good job selling me? That's not what it's about. It's about feeling what it's like to be the buyer. Are you nervous? Are you curious? Are you skeptical? Did you walk in thinking, I'm probably not going to buy anything? What changed your mind? What were the moments in that experience? And I think that that's one of the things that we often miss when we're trying to train or teach empathy is that folks need to know what they're empathizing with. And in order to do that, you have to actually have had the experience, because otherwise you're just pretending to share the experience. You're not actually sharing the experience.
Absolutely. No, I think the more we can have actually reference a lived experience that we've had, the better. I think there are millions of ways that that shows up, and all of those things contribute to our understanding and our experiences with empathy.
So then what do you think empathetic management looks like? If you're a frontline manager, how do you start to bring that into how you're working with agents?
Yeah, I think empathetic management, this is a great question, really hinges on acknowledgement that your agents are humans. They have good days and they have bad days. They have ups and downs. And lots of times we have a fraction, a thimbleful of an understanding of what their life outside of work looks like. And as a result, it's very difficult to truly appreciate what happened that morning before they got to work, how things are going with their loved ones. Do they feel like they're winning as a parent or not? Do they feel like they're winning as a spouse or not? Are they single and they're looking for connection and they're not finding it? Are they in a situation where they're dealing with loss, whether that's actual loss in the death of a loved one or loss of identity, loss of connection, in this COVID era that we find ourselves in, purely the loss of connection that so many people have experienced has created an environment where I would imagine, as a general rule, and you would know better than I, Mark, and your listeners would as well, that there's probably been some nicer conversations happening in the contact center because it's the only conversation I'm having, and I'm excited to talk to another human being, whereas before I might not get that chance. And so I think when we think about empathetic management or empathetic leadership, it's really doing our best to remember what it was like to be in that role in the organization with those responsibilities and to try to connect to what it would be like to be a similarly situated person. So to look at that employee and say, what does their personal life look like and how might that translate to what their work life looks like? I think we are coming to an era. I think we're in the era now, and the smartest companies in the world are paying attention to this. I think we're in the next 10 years going to be at a place where every company has to pay attention to this, whether they want to or not. And that is the depth of the employee experience as a whole life experience. Employers, I believe, would benefit from taking a more active role in considering their employees' life outside of work hours and what they can do to support that as a way to build retention and connection and empathy with those employees during business hours.
I just read an article today, and I wish I remember the exact title of it, but I'll get close. It said something along the lines of the 2021 talent changeover is here. And what the article was basically saying is that now that, hopefully, knock on wood, the pandemic appears to be wrapping up, at least in the United States, thank God. Now that the pandemic appears to be wrapping up, folks are going to take a step back and look at their opportunities and say, where do I want to go? So this is the time that organizations want to be investing in being an incredible place to work, because your folks who are working at your company are about to have 1,000 times more options than they've ever had before. They can work, at their home at any company anywhere in the world, probably literally 1,000 times. So their options just opened up. And similarly, if you want to win talent, you're now competing against 1,000 companies. So you have to be the best option for that person at that point in their life. I think you're so right, Joey. This focus on the work experience is about to get really, really intense. And I hope that folks don't misinterpret work experience as more ping pong tables, which, by the way, I freaking love ping pong tables. That's not
Sure.
what it's about.
Sure. No, well, here's the thing. It's about ping pong tables are a piece of the puzzle. They're not the solution to the problem, right? So creating space for your employees to actually let loose and have fun and, blow off some steam or relax or have a little camaraderie in the workplace, those are all good things. But you're spot on, Mark. It is not enough for an organization to say, we're going to enhance our culture. Let's get some tastier snacks, a ping pong table, and a video game system. No, that's like, those are potentially steps in the right direction, but there are no single answer solutions
Mm-hmm.
other than thinking comprehensively about the employee experience.
So, Joey, let's make the business case. Let's make the business case for employee experience, for empathy first customer reactions, and then finally for creating, raving fans. That might be three business cases. It seems like they all tie together pretty nicely, though. If you wanted to try to express to organization, this is why this should be an investment, not just something that gets talked about, but an investment. What does that business case look like, you think?
Sure. So let me try to do this, Mark. I'm going to start at the 35,000 level to try to connect all of them. Then I'll dive down into each one specifically, and then we'll pull back up to reconnect everything. All right. So when we think about the concept of acquisition versus retention, we have two distinct conversations. One is about attraction, one is about recruitment, one is about convincing, one is about persuasion. Then when we switch to the retention conversation, it's about maintaining, it's about deepening, it's about holding on to. So the very energies of the two activities are different. When we start to think about a price tag and associating a dollar sign to those activities, lots of times on the acquisition, marketing, sales side of the conversation, we are spending dollars with the hope of getting an action that will create a customer that we can then recoup those acquisition costs from and keep them long enough that they'll pay us more than we paid to get them in the door. They will stay in the door and will continue to give us enough money. Now, that usually shows up in one of three ways. It shows up in specifically giving us more money in the sense that we increase the pricing of our products, and so they have to pay more in subsequent years. We increase our share of wallet, meaning the total amount of money that they have allocated for our type of category or industry in their life. We're getting all of those dollars. And we increase the opportunity for referrals, which is turning those people into non-commissioned, uncompensated salespeople who are doing the job of recruiting more folks to the fold. So we want to keep them long enough to trigger those behaviors, and we want to keep them long enough to recoup the expenses. The problem is in the typical organization, if I say, what was your 2021 marketing budget? They can tell me. If I say, what's your 2021 presenting at exhibits or hosting webinars or sending out materials in direct mail campaigns, they can tell you exactly how much they've allocated for that. But when I say, how much money have you allocated towards retention? It's like cue the tumbleweed. Everybody's like, well, it's kind of a couple different things. We've got our contact center, we've got our retention efforts, we've got we've got all this. And it's like, no, what's the dollar amount? Lots of times clients will come to me and they'll say, Joey, I'm not even sure what I should spend on that. I was like, well, this is interesting. If you ask the average person in marketing, how much money should be spent on marketing? They will tell you in the typical organization, it's somewhere between 6 and 10% of revenues. But when we talk about how much should be spent on retention, everybody gets weird and like, well, it's not about the dollars, it's about the hugs. And, and it's like, no, there's a dollar component of this as well. So those are the challenges we have at the structural level. And now let's dive into each one specifically and talk about the practical dollar amount on the customer retention side, right? Depending on whose research you look at, it takes somewhere between, the amount of money you spend on your marketing and sales, you've got to retain a customer for anywhere from 3 months to 3 years before you recoup that marketing expense. Right? We're usually running at a loss in the beginning and we've got to hold them longer. Yet the research also shows that somewhere between 20 and 70% of your new customers will decide to stop doing business with you before they reach the 100-day anniversary. 20 to 70%. I want to let that sink in. 20 to 70% of the people that you have invested so much time, effort, and money to get them to come into the fold, to become a customer of yours, will leave before the 100-day anniversary, before you've been able to charge them for the next product or service, before you've been able to increase the share of wallet, and certainly before they've made a referral. So you've actually lost money on that customer. Huge problem when we think about the dollar signs on the customer experience side. Let's look at the employees side. The typical business will tell you that to replace an employee takes somewhere between 2 and 5 times the annual salary to recruit a new employee. Now, of course, that depends on the type of position they're in, the type of the industry, right? But it's a big number. It's a magnitude number, no matter what. Here's some scary statistics. The typical business spends less than 1 week training and onboarding their new employees. More than 50% of businesses spend less than 1 week training and onboarding their new employees. Yet almost 100% of businesses expect their employees to stay longer than 2 weeks. So what's fascinating to me is we're only willing to invest a modicum of time, effort, and talent in training them, but we want them to stay. We want them to be there a long time. 4% of new employees across all industries come for the first day on the job and never come back for the second day. 4%. Now, if we take that cost of reacquiring a new employee and we think about job postings and our HR personnel and recruiting and doing interviews and the amount of time that takes and getting them involved and getting them up to speed and getting the employee to accept our offer and the negotiation back and forth on the benefits package and getting them to start, if after all of that, 4% are going to bolt before their second day on the job, we're digging out of a deficit before we've even started. So when we get into the practical realities of the dollars, we see that if we don't retain our customers and if we don't retain our employees, we actually are losing money on these transactions, which most organizations, the way they respond to that is they throw more money at marketing and sales. Because if we're losing them, well, let's just go get some more. And eventually you burn out your potential audience. You burn through all the people that could buy from you. Now, one of the challenges we face here in, the modern era is we see everyone in the world as a potential customer. Marc, if we were to roll back the clock 200 years, when you and I maybe were born in a small town and never went more than 30 miles outside of that town in our entire lifetime, if I burned my relationship with you, there was a big consequence because there weren't a lot of other yous that I could go to. Now, it's almost seemed as acceptable to burn a customer relationship or an employee relationship because we think, oh, well, we'll just go get some more. You'll eventually run out. So to me, I don't even have to talk about why you should do this around just being a good human or being a more empathetic individual. We can go right to the dollars and see why the business case makes retention an imperative if you want to have a long-lasting organization.
On the retention side, Joey, why do you think there is this lack of clarity around what you should spend and how much you should spend in order to retain your customers?
I think there's a couple things. I think there's a biological reason. I think there's a historical reason, and I think there's a structural reason. Let's go through all three. The biological reason. Humans are naturally predisposed to like the chase more than the catch. As human beings, we get more excited about dating than being married. Okay. One only need look at how much more people feel at the beginning of a relationship when the courting is going on and there's flowers and there's dinners and there's shows and there's excitement compared to 10, 20, 30 years into a marriage where it's like Taco Tuesday again. Yep. Taco Tuesday again. Okay, here we go. Now, I'm not saying there's anything wrong with that, but I'm saying at a biological level, we are predisposed for the chase more than the catch. Now let's go to the historical level. If you were to look at the CEOs of the Fortune 1000, the great majority of those came up through marketing and sales. So there's a history of putting more emphasis on acquisition, on growth, on expansion, on development than fostering and nurturing growth. History has rewarded hunters more than gatherers. History has rewarded the people who would go out and bring back the game more than they would reward those who stayed and farmed the sustenance, right? So we have this historical imperative that's lining up with the biological. Then we come to the structural imperative. Let me ask this question. Think of your organization. Do you have a head of sales? Probably. Do you have a head of marketing or a chief marketing officer? Probably. Do you have a head of retention? Probably not. Do you have a head of customer experience? Probably not. And if you do, it is statistically likely that they report up to the head of marketing or sales, who then reports up to the CEO. So structurally, we've set it up that the people who are most responsible for ongoing customer interaction, ongoing customer experience, ongoing customer retention don't have a direct line to the head of the company. And as a general rule, they are our lowest paid employees with the least amount of power. Most organizations are not crushing it on the salaries they're paying their contact center agents.
Yep. Joe, I think that structural piece is huge. And I think that one of the big challenges there is this diffusion of responsibility, where when you get to the retention level, there's a million reasons why you could have gotten to the place you got. It could have been that there was a product issue. It could have been a supply chain issue. It could have been a manufacturing issue. It could have been a customer support issue. But the reason that customer is there having that problem could have been one of a million things. But as you mentioned, when you think about hunters, when you walk back and you're holding the elk by the feet and you're walking back with the elk, everyone knows who got the elk. And I think that that's true on the go-to-market side too. And I think it's one of the reasons that we've started to see this new narrative around sales and marketing collaborating and coming together. Because in the older era, it was who's holding the elk when it finally comes back across the line.
Absolutely. And what's interesting, Marc, is while I do see a breaking down of the silos and a breaking down of the barriers in a lot of organizations between marketing and sales, there is still a pretty strong wall between marketing and sales and account management or ongoing operational control. And so here's the thing. I agree with you. There are a ton of things that could have led to where that customer is right now from a retention point of view if something went wrong. But what I'm thinking about more is the holistic approach of when someone signs on the dotted line, when they hand over their hard-earned cash, when they officially transition from being a prospect to being a customer, who's responsible for that person? Who's responsible to make sure that we deliver on the promises we made in the marketing materials, we deliver on the commitments made in the sales conversation, and we deliver on an experience that will keep them coming back for more? As a general rule, there's been a handoff between sales and marketing to operations or account management. And much like the nightmare of every Olympic relay race, all too often that handoff is resulting in a dropped baton. And like the Olympics, you can't just bend down and pick it up and act like nothing ever happened. No, you're disqualified. That's the end of your race. Now, there are so many businesses that put effort into retention. They're like, oh, we have a retention department. And I don't know about you, Marc. Lots of times, if I'm upset and frustrated with a relationship with I'm having a brand, I'll call and ask to speak to the retention department because I know they have the power to solve my problem. Mm-hmm. And I'll make crazy requests. I'll be like, you know what? I want free service for a year for me to stay with you. Otherwise, I'm leaving. Now, I don't do that just to be a jerk or to be brazen. I do that because they actually have the power to do that. But what if we moved further down the timeline, earlier in the timeline, to be able to say, how can we avoid Joey ever needing to make that phone call? How can we be responsible enough for the experience that we're creating for our customers that we are navigating them through a complete journey to get to an end result of a raving fan?
Joey, I think that our conversation is bringing us to one last point that we really that we keep circling around here, and that is that when you're focused, when you're looking at that retention team, I think that a lot of folks have a philosophy that retention is purely serving the customer, and therefore there should be no sort of sales or revenue generating opportunity. That's for your hunters and your killers, and your killers do that, and then your wonderfully kind and gentle service people do the retention and the maintenance. What does the world look like to bring those two functions together? Should they be brought together?
Well, I think, if I may, Mark, and I know we're giving an example, and I talked about the hunters and gatherers. I think what's interesting is how much we extrapolate that narrative into language that we want to be careful around. Like, I don't know anybody who's excited about being killed, or anybody who's excited about being, slayed, or whatever aggressive technique we would put on to describe getting or acquired. Nobody wants to be acquired, right? People do want to be held. They do want to be appreciated. They do want to be nurtured. Those are things that, we can agree to. So I think what needs to happen, and I agree with you, those additional opportunities to upsell, those additional opportunities to increase the share of wallet or increase the revenue absolutely exist on the retention side. They absolutely exist on the ongoing conversation side. The problem is, again, coming back to structural setups, most businesses don't incentivize the behaviors they actually want. I was talking to some insurance folks the other day. I give a lot of virtual speeches. I give in-person speeches. And when we were talking about this, we looked at the typical insurance company. When you sign a new client, the carrier will pay you about 40% of their premiums. So let's say, Mark, I'm the insurance agent. I sell you, you become a new client. You're going to pay me $1,000 in premiums in year one. As the agent, I get about $400 in year one. In year two, I get about $250. In year three, I get about $150 of that. So each year as it goes on, my commission decreases. So what are you actually incentivizing me to do if you're the carrier? You're incentivizing to have me go get more, not get people who will stay. Imagine if we flipped that. What if in year one I got 15%, but in year two I got 20, and in year three I got 25, and in year four I got 30, and it kept going up and it kept going up to the point where in year 10 you might be paying me 70 or 80% commission. But guess what? You've recouped all your acquisition cost. The longer somebody's with you, the easier it is to serve them. There's less issues. There's less problems. Plus, you've probably sold me into other products and other opportunities. Why is it that we have no problem in paying hefty commissions to our salespeople, but when we talk about paying commissions to our retention people, our account managers, everybody gets all weird about it? They're like, oh, well, I don't know that we want to do that. Why? You're doing it on the front end. I'd actually rather have you do it on the back end, because those are the customers who've stayed. I'd rather incentivize the behavior of somebody staying than somebody who's coming for the first time. This always drove me crazy about the cable companies, and said, we've got a special deal, $19 per month for your first year. After that, it's $79 per month. Why are you incentivizing me to come for a year and then quit you and go sign up, maybe even come sign back up again with you, just quit the account to get the better deal? Why not say, hey, guess what? Each year you're with us, your fees are going to go down. Your prices are going to go down. Oh my gosh. Now you've got my attention.
Joey, incredible. Take us home with the final question we ask on every podcast. What do you think the contact center experience of 2030 will look like?
Well, it's interesting. 2030 is a scant 9 years away, which feels
I
really
know.
far away right now, but it's actually so much closer than we think. I think by 2030, we're going to see, as standard in the contact center industry, AI overlaid with human interaction. And this idea of software that is paying attention to the conversations and helping you navigate the conversations and augmenting the human interaction with the machine or the automated interaction. I think we're going to see a situation where chatbots and AI tools are going to be able to carry on conversations that feel better to us than human interactions in many ways. I think we're going to see a higher expectation for resolution of any issue I have with your brand being able to come through the contact center. So if I'm unhappy with the ad campaign you're running right now, that the contact center can take action on that, not just the product I purchased or the service I signed up for. So I think we're going to see a more holistic approach to contact. I also think we're going to see, in our society today, I feel like we are increasingly becoming more tribular, more tribal, more, you're either, what kind of brand do you represent? And we only need to think about, are you an Android person or are you an iOS person, right? And pretty quickly people run to their corner and say that's the kind of person they are. I think when we think about contact centers, there's going to be an opportunity to foster connection within the customer base or within the tribe through the non-business related conversations that are more aspirational or more communal or creating more space for customers to even interact with each other, facilitated by a contact center. So I think there's a lot of possibilities, and it's going to be fascinating to see this merging of humans and technology to create the contact center of 2030.
And it'll be so good for both the customer and the businesses.
I think so. I mean, I think at the end of the day, what we've come to realize is this belief that we have our personal life and we have our work life, or we have customers and we have, the organizations that are selling to them, providers, these are fictions. It's all the same. It's all humans dealing with humans. I talk about in my book, this idea of so many businesses focus on, well, are we B2B or we B2C? You're neither. You're H to H. You're human to human. And the more we can connect to our humanity, whether that's in our interactions with our employees or our customers or just each other, the better our overall life experience will be, which translates to better customer experience, better employee experience, better human experience.
Joey Coleman, thank you so much. And one more time, the name of your book and where folks can find you.
So folks can find Never Lose a Customer Again at your favorite bookstore. There's a physical hard copy version of the book. There's an ebook. There's an audiobook, which if you've enjoyed listening to me talk and tell stories, I narrate the audiobook so you can hear that. I've got a podcast, since you're listening to a podcast now, called Experience This, which is all about customer experience and little bite-sized snippets of delight of customer moments that have gone well and what we can learn from those. And if you want to connect to, I'd love to see you over at my website, joeycoleman.com. That's Joey, like a 5-year-old or a baby kangaroo. Coleman, Coleman, like the camping equipment, but no relation, joeycoleman.com. And I so appreciate the time, Marc, and I so appreciate all of you that listened into our conversation today.
You too, Joey. The next time you're in St. Louis, would love to treat you to a beer.
Sounds good. Thanks, Marc.
See you soon.